Good morning. Welcome to Remote Learning from Survival to Exceptional. And today we will be talking about best practices for equation-based courses. Okay, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Daniel Reynolds. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Daniel?
Sure. I'm a professor in the math department. Been at SMU for about 11 years now, and I teach courses kind of ranging from intermediate level undergraduate courses up through the graduate level course.
Awesome, thank you. Then we have Jim Linck.
Hey guys, Jim Linck. I'm a professor in the finance department and chair of the finance department. I teach a wide variety of courses in finance and actually have taught some in accounting as well. And I've actually been teaching online about 20 years, way back from my time at Georgia. About the year 2000, we started doing hybrid, and I've been at SMU for 8 years.
Awesome, thank you. And then we have Stephen Sekula.
Yeah, hi everybody, welcome. So I'm an associate professor of experimental particle physics in the Department of Physics in Dedman College. I've been here about the same amount of time as Dan. I'm going on about 11 years at this point. I've mostly taught undergraduate classes, although I do routinely teach a how to teach introductory physics graduate level course to train our teaching assistants. And I've mixed digital and in-person teaching now for about 6 years.
Thank you. Then we have Dr. Teresa Strecker.
Hi, I'm a senior lecturer in biology, and I've been teaching at SMU since 1996, which is 24 years. In that time, I've been teaching lab courses as well as large introductory biology courses in upper division. I teach an online course, strictly online in genomics, and we're working in our department on learning how to teach lab courses remote. So that's why I'm here, is to learn as much as I can and to pass on any information.
Thank you. And then Brian, and I apologize, Brian, I don't want to mess up your last name. Can you introduce your last name?
I'm Brian Zoltowski. Most students call me Dr. Z because they can't also pronounce my last name.
Okay.
I'm an associate professor in chemistry. I've been here going on now, it'll be 10 years. And I teach entry-level chemistry, so first-year chemistry courses, and then I teach advanced classes in biophysics for either seniors or graduate students.
Great. And then we have Ed Fox.
Hi, I'm Ed Fox. I'm a professor of marketing and the chairman of the marketing department. I have been teaching managerial statistics and data analytics for some time. Out of the 20 years I've been here, I've probably been teaching that about 15 years. And at the end of 2018, we started putting together our online MBA program, and I was tasked with the data analytics course, which we extended and incorporated experiential learning. So I developed that course. I've been teaching that course and working with some section instructors who are now teaching the course as well. In the last semester, I actually taught a computer programming course. It was a statistics-based course in demand analysis, and students programmed during that class. So I have some experience with that as well.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and we are excited to just get some insights from you on this. Hold on here. So I'm going to have Dr. Sekula kind of guide us with some questions, but if you are a participant and you have a Q&A button down at the bottom. If you have questions, I will be moderating those questions, and we will have, we'll kind of filter those through Dr. Sekula so we can get your questions answered. So if you want to go ahead and take that on, Dr. Sekula.
Sure, no problem. Let's think about spring 2020. I think that's a great place to start this conversation because a lot of us got surprised midway through the semester as to what we were teaching and how we were teaching it. So maybe going backward through the panel, and I'll go last if there's any need for me to add something. So starting with Ed, could you talk about one of those courses you were teaching this spring? How have you taught that course before, in person, hybrid, online, and how did you manage that transition in the middle of the semester?
Well, so I'm going to talk about the course is called Retail Analytics, and it's really a course in demand analysis and the application of demand analysis for specific kinds of managerial decisions, inventory decisions, pricing decisions, promotional decisions, and the like. It's unique pedagogically because I write SAS code in the class, and the students follow the SAS code. So it was a half semester course. So I did the first class meeting in the standard classroom environment, and then without the benefit of spring break for these students, we just transitioned online. So having had a little experience with this, my job one was to discriminate between what could be done asynchronously and what needed to be done in the live session. So the live session was compressed for these graduate classes, and I've been teaching primarily graduate classes. We do 3 hours plus in the classroom, and that doesn't work well in the online environment. So our live sessions are compressed to 1.5 hours. So what content could I move to asynchronous or outside? And so I took the lectures that precede the programming part of each class, and I tried to chunk those as best I could into videos, and I effectively did voiceover PowerPoint, which is kind of a low-tech way to present the information, have an accompanying, in this case, PowerPoint or notes or whatever would accompany that. And so I basically took the lecture out of the class and focused the live sessions themselves on programming. Having done that, the quality of the videos was not what I've done in other online courses, but we were operating in compressed time. So, you know, the students were actually quite kind about that. What ended up happening also is that you need an accountability mechanism. When you ask the students to do things outside of class, you need an accountability mechanism. And my low-tech accountability mechanism is Canvas-based quizzes. And it's not perfect, but it works to an extent, and it has the additional benefit of being able to go through those quizzes at the beginning and essentially summarize the material that they were supposed to get outside. Mm-hmm. So in going through those quizzes, I was able to identify what the students didn't take away and basically summarize the external material. Okay. Then we would start programming, and that was the majority of our live sessions. The thing I'd like to reiterate that really caught me off guard, but I've focused on a lot since, is the student's workspace. Typically, what I would do in the classroom is I would be programming at the front, and they would be following on their computer. The actual screen real estate is important in this context, because they've got to be able to see on part of their screen and be able to work on the other part of their screen. And I didn't realize this until 2 weeks in, when a student told me, no, I'm just watching what you do and then trying to follow after the fact, which I didn't want them to do, but they were constrained by screen real estate. So simple stuff. I have to make the font absurdly big so that they can partition their screen and work that way. All
right, let me interrupt you there. As I see we've had somebody with their hand up for a while. Christina, do you want to interject with a question from the audience?
I don't have a question. If the person that, it looks like it was April, if she has a question, if you can type it into the Q&A, that would be great, since we do not have audio set up for our attendance. attendees.
Okay, yeah, and to buy her some time to get that question to you, Teresa, could you jump in and comment on the same question again? Spring 2020, one class you were teaching, how did you handle that transition given the model you were using for that?
Okay, so I was teaching a molecular genetics lab. It was a wet lab in Dedman Life Sciences. I had about 12 students in 2 different sections, so about 24 students. The challenge was, the good thing is that by spring break, they had already learned all the hands-on techniques that they needed to do the last half of the semester. So what I did was I had to move a lot of the description and the in-class lectures that I would give in lab to pages on Canvas, where I illustrated them with pictures and embedded videos. And then I would provide students with a data page. And luckily I've been teaching that class for 13 years. So I have lots of bank data. And so they would still get raw data that they would need to use to generate their lab reports. And John Wise and I wrote the lab manual for this course, a decade ago. And so the students were still responsible for turning in a lab report. Only this time they would take their phones after they filled out the lab report and we have lab report pages where they write their report on the pages, which are structured. And they took screenshots of these pages with their phones. Then with Adobe Scanner, they can make one PDF file. They upload that to Canvas assignments. I have a rubric, and I've never been able to grade so quickly in my life. All of it online. It was really nice. Normally I grade these by hand. I would say this worked out because of the fact that I had, a wet lab for 8 weeks, and then I could follow it up. But the problem is doing this again. This is something we're struggling with in terms of how do we transition a wet lab where the students need to learn the actual tactile skills to carry out these experiments. So my colleague Ava Oberdorster has written an extensive, really wonderful best practice guide. And we're all trying to adapt ourselves to that guide and use it. And she's more than welcome to share that with whoever would like a copy of it. I recommend that. But as far as crunching numbers, I also make sure that, and I think this is important, is to anticipate what challenges your students are going to have when they face crunching the data. Anticipate that in either Canvas pages or in a mini video. I did both, combination of both, and it worked out really well. Plus, I was on Zoom, a couple hours a week per section just to be there to answer their questions. So that's what I did.
Yeah, no, great. The wet lab transition to digital is a particularly dicey issue, which I'm sure we'll come back to. All right, Christina, did we get a question?
Yes, we did get a question, and it's asking, could Teresa explain once again how she graded things on Canvas that she usually graded by hand?
Okay, so the rubric is key to this. So before students would turn in the lab report, I would open my lab manual, look at the lab report pages, and assign points to each part of the lab report, and I'd build my rubric using that design. So building a rubric would take, some time, maybe 20, 30 minutes, making sure, the points were distributed in such a way that the descriptions were, good. But the students use that as a guide too, because that's accessible to them. And I'll tell you, it was worth putting up the time up front, as so much of this is about putting your time up front to make it go streamlined afterwards. And so it wasn't a problem grading, 22, 24 lab reports at a time, and I could get those turned around within 12 hours, which was real nice. But again, it's organization and preparing ahead of time with a good detailed rubric.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much. Christina, before I go on to another panelist, do we have any other questions that have come in?
No, not at this time.
Okay. All right, let's jump to Jim then. So riffing off of what you've heard already from the other people that have already spoken, Jim, can you provide some insights from your perspective in the course you taught, or one of the courses you taught this spring? And then I think Teresa's raised an interesting point. You might have gotten away with it this semester because you had the benefit of the students being in the room for about half the term.
Right.
How does that change in the fall if it doesn't start out that way?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think that we're expecting summer to be, orders of magnitude better than the spring from an overall quality perspective. And we've done a lot of things at the college level. The department chairs and the deans have been in a lot of meetings and scheduling and stuff. And so we've changed the summer, and we've certainly learned a lot because, as Ed mentioned, ours was even a week more unique than the rest of campus because our MBA programs had spring break before this. So when the university said we're all online, we had a whole bunch of faculty that had to be ready. That was announced on Friday. We were kind of warning people, but they had to be ready on Monday. And so we had some growing pains. I would say a couple things. So I was teaching an executive MBA course face-to-face. I had about 55 students in it. And I was also teaching one, Ed mentioned, our online MBA program that we started about a year or so ago. I was teaching in that as well. So that actually benefited me quite a bit, but also gave me some real good contrast because our online MBA program is set up where there are 15 students in each section. That's just how they're broken up for the live sessions, and we meet live an hour and a half a week. So I'd reiterate what Ed said. 3 hours doesn't work. And in a synchronous session live, it doesn't work particularly well, I would say. But in having 15 faces on the screen is a lot different than having 60. And in fact, we're changing it so we don't have any more than 20, if at all possible, going forward. But what you can do with 15 is, quite frankly, it's easier prep, I would say, because you do a lot of prep in terms of getting videos and things together, but it's easier to see all the faces in cold call and do things more like a regular classroom. Where with 60, you can't do this. And I would say one of the biggest things that I noticed two things. The other thing I did as department chair, I sat in on a lot of classes from the faculty in my department, and I learned some stuff from that too. So a couple things I would say is one of the biggest things that helped me, I thought, in my big class with 60 faces on the screen was I started doing what some people refer to as warm calling. So I'd assign groups of students certain questions, like if I was going to do a case. I did a couple cases, and I would take them and break them into groups, and I would say, okay, you're going to be responsible to lead the discussion of this kind of thing, and you're going to be responsible to do this thing. Because I found that with 60, now I would say the other thing that, a couple people brought it up already, you got to have the cameras on. When the cameras aren't on, that's a big detractor, but we couldn't really force students to do that in the spring because they didn't sign up for it. So that was an issue that we kind of had to live with. But I found it really difficult to engage students in cold call with 60 faces on the screen, and most of them didn't have their cameras on. So it just didn't work. And so I started breaking them into smaller groups and saying, okay, the day before class, I would say, you're going to be responsible for this portion, leading it and all that. And then I would cold call, within that. The other thing I would say is that I feel, and again, equation-based courses, that's what most in our department, we have a lot of that kind of stuff. We're doing lots of math and writing things on the screen. So I'd say a couple things is lecturing, just doing your standard lectures like you do in the classroom does not work very well in a live session. It's boring. The students are not engaged. So we have this thing we call flipping the classroom, right? Or reverse the classroom, all this stuff. I think in general it's a good thing anyway, at least to some degree. But I think in the online world, you need to be doing something that keeps the students engaged when you're in the live session. For me, I'm working on an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm constantly writing on my screen. I have one screen that I have all the students' faces on, and get the chat window open and stuff. And I have another screen that I'm writing on. I just share my laptop screen and I'm constantly writing on a whiteboard on it. And then asking them to do the same. And I think that probably one of my biggest takeaways is that the live sessions, which I think are important, need to be very interactive as much as you can. And as Ed and Teresa mentioned, you got to plan it ahead of time.
Yeah, no, that's great.
You start to figure out what works well that they can consume on their own, and then what you need to do in the face-to-face session. And I agree with Ed, starting the class off with something to see if they were prepared and did the material. I'd say one of the biggest things that a lot of us found is that the students, you could put all the videos out there that you want, but if they don't review them before class, it really takes away from the live sessions.
Yeah, I mean, since we're effectively being forced into a flipped classroom-like scenario, pre-assessing is rather important in this era as well. Yeah. Christina, do we have any questions?
Yes, I think I have kind of two questions. One is, how do you work through formulas in an online session? So maybe somebody can talk about how the technological side of it, how do you demonstrate? What are you using? What kind of tools? And then the other is also, if you're having students turn in formula-based answers, how does that work? What have you guys done that has worked, and maybe what hasn't worked, so we know to avoid?
Mm-hmm.
I'll step in very quickly, and if I may, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Host disabled.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to be possible. So can you just talk in 30 seconds about?
So, well, I was going to demonstrate the application of rubrics that Teresa had mentioned, because we have that for our online exams, but also the Microsoft programs in the latest iteration are really well integrated with pen-based devices. So one of the benefits actually of being able to do this, which has bled into my classroom instruction, is for the entry analytics course, the students use Excel, and they end up using Excel functions and formulas to do the computation. But I can write using my tablet. I can write the formulas on the Excel spreadsheet and then implement them in a cell next to the formula. So it's not like I'm working on a whiteboard separate from whatever tool we're using for computation. They're right there on the same place, and yeah. I can do those annotations. I can save them or not. But the students see the formulas together with whatever tool they're using for computation, okay. And that's actually beneficial both online and in the regular classroom.
Yeah. Can I call on Dan next? Do you have any thoughts on those two things? First of all, how do you integrate demonstration of equations into the classroom environment, or maybe before, during, or after? And then how do you get students to submit formulas to you? Oh, you're muted, Dan.
Thanks. I was trying to be considerate. Okay, so all of my classes have always been kind of halfway flipped, in that, like other folks, I try to prepare things ahead of time, and essentially, in this semester, essentially, I've been typing up all my lecture notes and giving these PDFs full of the LaTeX equations and derivations, et cetera, to the students at least a week ahead of time or a few days ahead of time, so they can kind of read ahead. And then they have like a Canvas quiz, these multiple choice things, just to see if they read, and that's due before class starts, so I can kind of do this pre-assessment. During class, I try to, because they've read and I assume that they understand the easiest things, then we spend our class time doing where I explain the hard topics that I think, students can read all they want, but they're not going to understand some really detailed proof of something or some really hard derivation. So we work through that together. So that's still kind of lecture-y. But I always alternate between that and doing examples. And so for examples, I use essentially a whiteboard. I use an iPad, and I have this the Notability app, and I share that, and we work through all the stuff together. Yeah, and so they see it. I then share it and post it all to Canvas afterwards, which helps for the students who are, say, in China and can't attend class synchronously. And then one thing as far as assessment is concerned, Canvas quizzes might be fine for some things, but they're really not even remotely useful for a large scale mathematical derivations and working through integrals and things like that. And so the two courses I was teaching this spring were Introduction to Linear Algebra and Calculus 3. Both of them have 2-3 pages of derivations for a problem. And so what I did this semester, but I'd also been doing in the past, is students would handwrite all of their stuff because they don't necessarily know how to type it. But then after they'd done all their work, they would scan it to a single PDF. And it's easy on campus because they just stick them in any of the copy machines and they can send it to themselves, and it's high resolution, et cetera. But there's a lot of free apps that they can use with their phones. I think even the iPhone with the camera app, it can even scan to a single PDF file and upload. But students would then take their homework or even their exams, and they upload those to Canvas. And so, and then on my iPad again, I can grade with my pen, just like I do on paper. They can see it essentially immediately as I make the comments, and then they can get their assessment back from that. And so it hasn't changed a lot, except for the work ahead of time to get all the materials ready so they can read beforehand and they can have my lecture notes beforehand, so they aren't trying to scribble down everything I'm saying as we go.
Okay, yeah, and then Brian, we haven't heard from you yet. Can you comment on these things as well?
Yeah, I think I kind of did a hybrid of what a lot of people are echoing. I have a Tuesday, Thursday class, so it's an hour and 20 minutes each. It's not quite the 3 hours that other people were talking about, but an hour and 20 minutes straight of lecture in an online format is probably not the most conducive to learning. And my class has a lot of mathematics in it. And then in the latter part of the course, it has organic chemistry, which is a lot of drawing of molecules, neither of which are really conducive to, PowerPoint format as being the best way to teach. So I ended up switching over to kind of what I would call a hybrid flipped class model, where I realized even for myself, doing a long lecture in an online format is just too much. So I tried to keep a lecture format down to about 30 to 40 minutes tops, where I went over a lot of the main material. And then at the end of that, I gave them an assignment that was basically a couple problems that were representative of the core material that lecture had, that they then had to submit, similar to what Dan was saying, scan it in and submit it online before they would get access in Canvas to a step-by-step walkthrough of those problems from me. So they had the lecture part, they had then an assessment they had to submit based on that material to give them access to kind of the step-by-step process they should have been using. And then I used the actual lecture time for more advanced, more difficult problems that we could all work through together, or problems that they had, with different assignments that were available. So we used the actual lecture time for more difficult material. One of the problems I had that was doing initially assessment. My exams, kind of like what Dan was getting at, are usually more about the process of solving a problem, not necessarily the exact answer. You can't really set up a good quiz or something in Canvas to grade that or to assess it. So I had to come up with either a different assessment strategy or a good grading procedure. For spring term, I kept it as my normal format. We set up exams online in Canvas, where I made sure that the students previously showed me what their workspace would look like, so that I could make sure that I could see their entire workspace, so that they could work through a printed off exam on their own and then scan it in and submit it. The assessment for me then was more difficult because every problem I had to grade by hand, basically on a computer screen, which is less pleasant than the normal way of doing it. But I think it ultimately still maintains the aspect of working through a problem as the focus of the class, not simply getting a simple answer.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, so I taught modern physics, the third semester physics class this semester. It's the gateway to the physics major, but it tends to be about half to 2/3 electrical engineering majors. So it's a pretty good mix of people who are maybe core interested in physics and students who are taking this to get some more depth in physics on maybe the electrical engineering side of things. One of the things that I did was similar to what I just heard from both Dan and Brian, was I need to assess on process. So but my problems can have numerical answers in many cases. So I did the best of both worlds. I would always have 2 Canvas assignments for example, an in-class problem solving exercise or for an exam. One of them was numerical only. Basically, I would check to see if they got the right numerical answers within some tolerance. So I'd have to write that up before I deployed it. That wasn't such a big deal. For the process, which is like 90% of the credit, however, for that assignment, 10% is did you get the right answer? But I care more about what was the process that led to it. Were you accidentally correct? Did you make 6 errors that all canceled each other out and happened to get the right answer? I need to know that, right? So indeed, I would give them usually a 20 to 30 minute grace period after the close of the assignment to get especially if it was done live, like an exam or a problem solving exercise in class. They could then scan using their phone. Cam Scanner is a pretty common app for this. Upload the PDF. I would go into Canvas and I would just make marks. So I type comments, X if something's wrong, put a comment next to it, check if something's right. If I thought it was really good, I'd put the words excellent or awesome next to it. Then I had a rubric that I created, and it had 3 categories. Did they follow my guidelines for good quality written work? That's usually worth about 10%. Okay, so did they box their answers? Did they use the right units? How were their significant figures? These things do matter to an experimentalist. The rest of it is, did they show strength in the foundations? Did they show mastery of the process? That's most of the points. And then I had gradations there, essentially a scale of say 0 to 5. 5 being outstanding, they've clearly mastered this at an advanced level. 3 being a C student, essentially, that they're getting it. They're demonstrating basically at expectation learning, and then everything's either above or below that. And that was a very quick check to do the grading then. So I could make my hand comments, but then translating that into a grade was click, 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 next student. So, because I think we all know what mastery looks like. I think we all know what fair looks like. I think we all know what weak looks like in this process. And we can code that up in a rubric. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So to follow up on what Stephen was saying, this is all done within a Canvas quiz where you have a file upload question. So you write the question and give them all the details, perhaps in a download. And then they do it, they upload the file, and then you can actually use the speed grader feature of Canvas Quiz where you can apply the rubric, or you can write annotations on that exam, and then you put in the numbers. So Canvas actually has a mechanism for doing these file uploads and grading them as efficiently as you can. And Teresa mentioned it as well.
Yep. Yeah, and I should note that it's not just the quizzes. Any Canvas assignment will allow you to do that. If you use the new quiz module, it actually overrides the speed grader, so you need to watch out. Things shuffle around in Canvas from time to time as they do upgrades, and I got bit by the new quiz module this semester, so.
One quick thing I could add, 'cause I see a lot of people asking kind of questions related to it, is I consider basically an iPad or some type of Surface device essential for these courses. I really believe that, one of the things keeping them active is the constant writing of the actual work, especially for math and drawing molecules. You really need to have kind of that whiteboard equivalent for the course. And I know, at least for an iPad, which is what I use, being able to share that information into Zoom is extremely easy. And you can do similar things with Panopto and numerous other different softwares out there that make it really convenient to share information and to simultaneously have basically your video recorded and your work recorded at the same time. So really, an iPad or some Surface device, I think, is essential material for teaching these courses.
Yeah, Steve, I'm going to add something to that as well, because I noticed I've been using a Surface or a Surface-like device forever, and with Windows, there's almost nothing you can't write on. Yeah. Applications, a zillion different whiteboards and things like that. I completely agree with Brian, it's essential. But I wanted to say something, we have quite a few Mac users as well. And I noticed this, several did this, but the first one I noticed, I hadn't seen this before, but I thought it's pretty clever. He was running the class on a Mac, but then he also with the Mac, you can wirelessly connect to an iPad. It just is automatic now if you have the latest version of the software. Mm-hmm. And so what he would do when he was sort of lecturing and laying things out, he would be on his Mac, and then he would just switch to the iPad, and he used it just as a whiteboard, but you could do other things as well in the with the iPad if you were a Mac user. Now, if you're a Windows user with the Surface or a Surface-like device, you can do it all on the same device. The other thing I would say, related to what Brian said, for me, there's sort of two kinds of asynchronous videos that I put together for my classes. One is what Ed referred to, sort of voiceover PowerPoints for sort of lecture material and some problems built in there. And the other, I don't know if this is a real term, but I call them screencasts. And it was what Brian was describing. We are constantly solving problems and putting things together where you got to work them through. And I tell you what, I looked at my my feedback and other faculty's feedback and evaluations. Those things are very, very well received. You can do them in the live session, but also asynchronous. Take 5 or 10 minutes and solve a problem that you're talking through and walking through and constant interactions with your pen or something like that. So yeah. I think that those are quite effective.
Yeah. All right. So two things here. So first of all, Christina asked us if we would be willing to share the rubrics that many of us seem to have designed to assess various things. So maybe, Christina, we could have IT as a follow-up to this panel, set up a page that allows us to then give somebody that information centrally. That way we don't have to take individual emails and things like that, which is inefficient. Would that be reasonable, Christina, to do?
Yes, I'll coordinate that with you guys, even if it's just screenshots or whatever, because I know sometimes Canvas is a little finicky on exporting, but I will coordinate that and email the attendees if they're interested. So they have, maybe we put it all in a box folder or something. Yep. That would be great.
One of our most recent Q&A questions was about technologies. What physical hardware do we use? What applications do we use? So I think as we're drawing to the close of the panel time, maybe we go around and each share one piece of hardware and one piece of software we would recommend to people. So I held this up earlier and this was noted by other people as well. So I am actually a Linux person. This is the one piece of non-Linux thing that I use, and it's the iPad, specifically with the Apple Pencil, which I treated myself to about 2 years ago. So this did not come from a technology grant. This is my own personal device. So your mileage may vary on whether or not you choose to go this kind of device or not, because Mac tends to be expensive. But the app that's running on it is the one that was mentioned earlier, I think by Dan, and that's Notability. And not only would it allow me to record a lecture and handwrite, and the audio would be synced to the lecture if I needed it to be, but I can share this with my students as a desktop device in Zoom, so a second device, or I can use it to annotate in Zoom using the Apple Pencil. All right, so Dan, do you want to add anything? And we'll keep going around the panel.
So I just do exactly what Steve just said. So there's not really anything new to add to that.
Okay. How about Jim? What do you use? Do you have anything to add to that?
I use iPad as well sometimes. I got a virtual background, so you can't see it.
it's messy room. Jim, yeah.
But I've been I'm a Surface Pro guy. I'm a Windows guy. I've been, in fact, before the Surface Pro came out. I mean, I almost 20 years ago, there was technology that could do this in Windows that I did. So that's, I would say, the other thing that's in this. Couple other things that are indispensable to me. Now, technology has changed, so some of this is old and probably superseded by even better stuff, but I'm used to it. But one is I use this program called Camtasia a lot, and that's a screen recording thing. The reason I like it is it's relatively simple. This is what I do my screencasts in. It just records everything on your screen, including writing and stuff. And then you can go and pretty simply edit them, you know, get some of the ums and all that out of there and get as anal as you need to be. With the time allotted. The one other thing I would say for me that's just completely indispensable, I cannot run an online class if I don't have a second monitor, or at least a really big monitor, because I want to be able to see the faces and then have the screen real estate to write on and stuff. This was what Ed was referring to. It'd be great if all the students had that too. But so those are some things that I sort of can't live without, I would say.
Okay, great. Yeah, Teresa?
Well, I'm not as techie as all of you. I'm from a different generation. But I think the iPad, Apple iPad is definitely something that's indispensable. I completely think that's awesome. I would also just interject here one thing about, we haven't really talked about Panopto at all. And Panopto has, for me, been something that has been an amazing aid, especially since you can embed quiz questions after you've made the recording to check in real time, if you will, as they're watching it, which isn't real time, to assess it. And then you get a report back, and you can actually, this is part of one's attendance. So I just want to put that in. I know that's not what you're asking me, but I didn't want it to close without popping that in there.
No, that's great. I mean, certainly Panopto's been a lifesaver for me for like sharing student projects that are recorded has been very nice.
Absolutely,
so, yeah. Brian.
My main device also is going to be the iPad, which basically lives next to this computer right now, is because I pretty much use it for all the teaching aspects. I also echo that Panopto can be students really like it because of the different features that are in it that makes it easier for them to get back to material that they want to review, because you can basically embed in there, basically go back to a specific slide for this topic. And the students then can get back to it really quickly as opposed to just scanning through a video. But I'll also just emphasize that if you don't like having to learn new software or different aspects, Zoom can be used for just about anything. And especially if you have a Mac, at least computer from my side, and then an iPad, being able to jump between different types of software, for a PowerPoint to a PDF to using a whiteboard, I can use my Mac computer and the iPad in conjunction with each other to very seamlessly go between different types of presentations, while being able to annotate all of it in real time on the iPad. And I think that really kind of goes well together, where then it can be just recorded in Zoom pretty simply.
Great, and we got a comment, which I'm sure IT is gonna love, that these devices should be, somehow facilities should be provided with these devices. Now, I'll note that there's at least one small grant program out there for teaching aids for digital teaching. I don't know if the deadline for that is closed or not, but I'm assuming things like this will continue to pop up. So hopefully we can all take advantage of them. And then last, Ed, do you want to jump in?
I'd like to comment on that. Like Jim, I use a single device, a Windows-based tablet. If you're going to do that, you need a wireless keyboard and mouse for data entry, because you're set up like a tablet. You need both. Most of the tablets have limited USB drives. So get a USB splitter where you can plug in your monitor if you're not wireless, and your other devices. So you can just plug in and then you're ready to teach.
Yeah, and tied to this as well is the question of, should students have a second monitor? That's a tough question. I mean, I'm always loath, for instance, personally, to require students to have things in their personal space, but it is something maybe the university wants to think about going forward if this continues, for a while. So one thing, Christina, at the close here that we might want to just bring up is that we could also, each of us, maybe be asked to provide a software and technology what we do list for different activities, recording videos, conducting classroom activities, things like that. I mean, Canvas is an obvious one, but if there's some little thing like Camtasia was a good example, what would you recommend somebody use to screen record a lecture or part of a lecture? We could provide little, here's our daily list of things, and you could amalgamate that together.
Yes. So. We'll get that together. And I do want to say that today at 4 o'clock, we do have a workshop. It's called Producing Quality Video-Based Content, that covers the ins and outs of Panopto. So if you are interested in attending that, please go ahead and register. I think that will be very valuable for you. We do have a hard stop right now, so thank you so much for the panelists for taking their time to just let us ask questions and kind of learn from you, and hopefully this was helpful for all the participants. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.